Hi everybody, it's David Millar with the Millar Group, and today I want to take a look at the residential purchase agreement for you. And what this does is this is the document that your real estate agent will use to write an offer for you if you're looking to buy a home on the Russian River. The California Association of Realtors creates these documents, and they're pretty much the standard in California, especially in Sonoma County and the Russian River area. So let's jump right into the document. This is the initial part of the document. It's called the Disclosure Regarding Real Estate Agency Relationships. This will be what is filled out, which says that the actual agent that is writing the offer for you is representing you. So they'll put in the buyer's name, and then they will put in their firm name, their DRE license for the brokerage, which is the brokerage that the agent will be working for, unless the agent is a licensed broker themselves, then it would be the same number as the brokerage and the DRE license. But say for me, I work for Keller Williams Realty. I would put in Keller Williams Realty name, their DRE license number, and then my name and my DRE license number. And then the next page that we go to is the first page on the residential purchase agreement contract. What you're going to see here is you put in the address. You put in, again, the agent will put in the broker's name and the agent's name, both buyer and seller agents and brokerages. Now, if the agent is representing both the buyer and the seller, it's important that this box here is checked where it says both buyer and seller are being represented by the same agent. That is required if there is a dual agency. And then he would put his name in numbers in both categories for buyer and seller. Next is the terms of the purchase of the allocation of costs. The purchase price is the first item you put in, most important. Next would be close of escrow day, or how many days till close of escrow. So if you're doing a 30-day escrow, that would mean from the day of acceptance. The next day is day one, and then 30 days from then is the close of escrow. Or you could do a set date as the close of escrow. Expiration of the offer is generally the standard is 3 calendar days. But if you're writing an offer when you're in a situation where you are competing with another buyer, you might want to have your offer be maybe 24 hours. After 24 hours, the offer will expire. That way, the seller doesn't have time to go back and forth with the other client. They're going to have to make a decision based on your time frame. So standard is 3 days, but if you're in a competitive situation, sometimes people like to tighten that up to 24 hours. Initial deposit of the purchase price. The industry standard here is 3%. Now 3% of the purchase price. And what that equals is liquidated damages. And we'll get into that later in the contract. Liquidated damages is basically if you were to write an offer, release all of your contingencies, and then 2 days before you're going to close escrow, you decide you want to move to Hawaii and you don't want to do the contract, you could be liable for that 3% of the purchase price. That's generally what they put down as a initial deposit amount as an industry standard here. You can put down any amount you want, but you want your offer to get accepted, so you want to try to stick with what the industry standards are. Next portion of the document is the loan amount. You would put together how much you are getting a loan for if it's not all cash. And then on the right side over here, you check if it's a FHA, a VA, or a conventional loan. Then you would have the balance of the purchase price and the total purchase price total, which would equal the amount you wrote the offer for. Then at the bottom of each one of these pages, you will initial. Next section is who's covering what costs. And the first item there is seller credit to buyer. Sometimes buyers ask for a credit back. It could be for closing costs. Closing costs would be fees, loans, anything that have to do with a loan, that could be a closing cost. And so that would be where the buyer may ask the seller to credit them money for closing costs. The next item, G3, is a big item. It's super important that you check, that you make sure that G3, that you look at it. It's called the seller payment to compensate. That is where the buyer's agent asks the seller to pay them a commission. So generally, again, the industry standard out here for buyer representation right now is 2.5%. It is completely negotiable. So that item you have to know what percentages are being written in there. Generally, if you want to get your offer accepted, people generally write 2.5%, but you can write anything you want in there. That is 18A, seller payment to compensate buyer's broker. Next is loans and loan contingencies. This is where you put down the information regarding your loan. Generally, a loan contingency would be 17 days per the standard in the contract. Again, you could put in whatever you want. If you're in a competitive situation, you've already got your loan approval done, and your lender can get things done quicker. Maybe you want to put in 12 days to make your offer look better. Offers are a beauty contest, so whoever has the best looking offer is going to get their offer accepted. Investigation of property, again, 17 days. You can also change that to, if you've already got a home and pest inspection, and you're happy with those inspections and you don't want to do any more inspections, you could tighten up the investigation period or extend it. It's all based on however you want to write the offer. Insurance seems to be a big contingency these days, especially out in the Russian River area, because we have a lot of high fire zones. And if you're in a high fire zone, most likely you're only going to be able to get insurance from the California State Fair Plan. So you need to have time to be able to do that. That's quite a lengthy process to get that approved. And you want to have that approval before you buy the house, of course, because you want to make sure that you can get insurance. Next is possession, and basically the top thing to look at there is time of possession. When you will reach the standard is 6 o'clock, day of close of escrow is pretty much a standard. So that would say when you close, you can take possession at 6 o'clock on that day. Next are pretty much standard. We usually leave these alone: document fees and compliance. Again, it's all up to you about what you want to put in there, but the California Association of Realtors has kind of come up with the industry standards for those times and what needs to be performed. The next item would be items included, and this is really important to check to make sure if you want the stove, if you want the refrigerator, if you want the dishwasher, you got to make sure that these boxes are checked here, because this is where it locks it in that those are the items that you're going to take. Allocations of costs is going to talk about who pays for what. Generally, industry standard out in the Russian River is the seller pays for the natural hazard zone disclosure report. So you can check either box, but generally your agent is going to be able to walk you through what is most important for these, and to get your offer accepted, what is the industry standard, what are people expecting. Your agent can walk you through that. Smoke alarms, CO2 detectors, hot water heater bracing, those are all required by state law to be done before close of escrow. Generally, the seller pays for that too. Escrow fees and title insurance. Generally, the buyer pays for title and escrow. I have been seeing some offers come across my desk recently where buyers are asking for the seller to pay for their own fees when it comes to escrow fees. So that's something that might be shifting in the marketplace. But generally, in the past, buyer pays seller and title and escrow fees. But again, this is all negotiable stuff. So this is where you write your initial offer and your initial ask. The seller can always come back to you with a counter offer if you want to go that route. County transfer tax fee, again, seller generally pays for that as an industry standard. And there is no city transfer tax fees out in the Russian River. We're all unincorporated here. These are all towns. They're not city municipalities. So there is no city transfer tax fee for, say, Guerneville or Forestville or Monte or Cazadero. So that would just be left blank. Then you've got HOA fees if you're in a condo. And we've been seeing buyers also asking for sellers to pay for home warranties more recently. So that again, the buyer can ask the seller to pay for a home warranty. But again, as a seller, you can always reject that or counter back on that item if you so choose. Next is property addendum and advisories. Generally, we just leave the standard check boxes that are checked. Disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships, buyer investigation advisory, wire fraud advisory, fair housing and discrimination advisory, and buyer homeowner insurance advisory. Those are the standards that we leave checked. If, say, you had a property that had a tenant and the tenant was going to be staying in the property, you would want to check the tenant occupied property addendum, which details out things like rent, how long they're staying. You also have to do an estoppel certificate, which you get a copy of the leases. So it just basically nails down a lot more of those details. This contract goes on and on and on. And I could spend entire days on some of these paragraphs, or at least an hour on a lot of these paragraphs. So I'm just trying to give you a basic overview of the document. This is where we get more into details like loans. It's a lot of definitions of what items that were referred to earlier in the contract. It gets into the nitty-gritty of the definitions of those. And then we're only on page 4, and we start to get into definitions. Seller remaining in possession after close of time of escrow. Like that starts to talk about if the seller has the right to remain in possession after close of escrow, that there's a form that needs to be filled out, and it gives more details about who has what responsibility and what that's going to look like. So this has really been thought out. It's really good because it covers a lot of the details, like loans. Contingencies, removal of contingencies. It says for loans, if there is no appraisal or insurance contingency, or appraisal or insurance contingency has been waived or removed, then failure of the property to appraise at purchase price, or lender conditioning the loan on if about obtaining insurance does not entitle buyer to exercise the cancellation right pursuant to the loan contingency. So basically that's saying is if you've removed your loan contingency at the beginning of the contract, what we saw at the beginning, that you're not going to be able to, if you can't get your loan, you're not going to be able to keep your deposit most likely. So that's part of the whole contingency process, is you're saying I'm going to do these things, and that's why we give ourselves the time to be able to and it's removals of contingency of cancellation. So it gives, again, this is more definitions of what's going on in the beginning of the contract. And as you can see, it's quite lengthy. Goes on and on and on about a lot of different, basically every single item in the contract. It'll give us more definition. So if you're interested, you should definitely read this stuff, especially when it comes to stuff like defensible space disclosure. Then we now have a defensible space disclosure that the seller must fill out, talking about defensible space around the house and what they know about the fire hardening of the home. Buyer's investigation of property and matters affecting property. This is a big one, number 12, because basically it's talking about what your rights are. And basically, as a buyer, your right is to do any and all inspections you deem necessary during the contingency period. So if you have a 17-day inspection contingency, you can do a home inspection, a pest inspection, a septic inspection, a mold inspection. You have the right to go over all the documentation and go to the county and pull county records if you want to do that during that inspection contingency period. And then also that the seller has to make the property available to buyer for all those inspections. And it just gives the details of what that looks like and whose responsibilities are what. Time periods, removal of contingencies, cancellation rights. Talks about all that stuff. Gives you all the definitions and specifics about what's going to happen during the process. As you can tell, we're on page 13 of 17 pages. Every year I think I've been in the business, this document has grown longer and longer and longer. Here's more definitions and instructions about what acceptance means, what an agent means, what an agreement means. So really gets into the nitty-gritty. So it's a very well-written document. Item number 29. Notice it's in bold and has a big black box around it. That means if you see something that's bold or has a big black box around it or is handwritten, make sure you really slow down and read it and take a look at it. This is talking about liquidated damages. A lot of people don't know what liquidated damages means. Basically, it means that no more than 3% of the purchase price can be held by the seller if the buyer does not perform. Now, what has to happen is both people have to sign it at escrow to release that deposit. So that's a whole different story of what happens when you get into a dispute. But basically it's saying if you've released your home inspection, you released your pest inspection, you released all of your inspections, and you say, okay, I'm ready to go, and then you back out, you could be liable up to 3% at original deposit that you put in, as a basically, well, let me read it for you here because it's very important. If a buyer fails to complete this purchase because of buyer's default, seller shall remain as liquidated damages the deposit actually paid. If the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, one of which buyer intends to occupy, then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. Any excess shall be returned to the buyer. Release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions from both buyer and seller. Judicial decision or arbitration of award. So that's saying buyer and seller are going to have to both release the 3% from title and escrow, or arbitration or a judicial decision can determine that. At any time of increased deposit, buyer and seller shall sign a separate liquidated damage provision incorporating the increased deposit as a liquidated damages. Just something very important to know. And if you've got any questions regarding legality or legal questions, definitely go to a real estate attorney with those questions. Real estate agents are not lawyers. Legality needs to be talked about with an attorney. Arbitration of disputes. So this is where you agree to arbitrate, and this has the definitions of arbitration and what will happen in that situation. So that generally you don't have to initial this, but if you don't agree to arbitration, the seller probably is not going to accept the offer. So you need to make that decision. And some buyers are attorneys themselves and they don't like arbitration. So it's really up to you to decide how you want to craft your purchase agreement. Then it gets to the end where you sign and you date. Then your agent will send it over to the other agent. Agents' names and phone numbers and emails. Make sure the phone numbers, email, DRE licenses are on the purchase agreement. Then that gets sent over to the other agent. They present it to the seller. The seller will either accept it or write a counter offer where they accept it subject to the counter offer. They may want to change some of the terms of the agreement. So this gives you a basic outline of the residential purchase agreement. Again, there's a lot of depth here. You want to take your time looking at this and reviewing this document and make sure that any questions that you have, you ask your agent. If you've got questions around legal issues, you want to make sure that you talk with an attorney. And I hope this gives you a little bit better feeling and a little bit better knowledge about the residential purchase agreement. If you've got any questions regarding real estate in the Russian River or the Guerneville, Monterey, Cazadero corridor, I specialize in that area. I'd love to help you out. My name's David Millar. The number is 707-217-1786. Have a great day.